Welcome to Sound of Resistance channel. The Ukrainian army continues to send the Russian invaders home. The Ukrainian army was able to retake most of the territories occupied by the Russian army in a short time. The Ukrainian army has turned into a chain in Ukraine that the Russians could not break by displaying an example of unpredictable success. The Russian army could not find an environment it dreamed of in Ukraine. Russian leader Putin left his place to disappointment after the resistance he faced in Ukraine after the beginning of the occupation of Ukraine. After he stated that the occupation in Ukraine would be completed in a short time, the Russian army lost a large number of soldiers of the Ukrainian army with the attack, causing deep wounds in the Russian army that are difficult to close. Russia suffered a great loss of power in Ukraine. Hero soldiers of Ukraine continue their struggle to expel Russian soldiers from their countries. The victories of the Ukrainian army on the Russian fronts have greatly reduced the morale and motivation of the Russian soldiers. As a result of the low morale of the Russian soldiers, confusion, chaos and rebellions follow each other within the army. One of the biggest problems in the Russian army is the disobedience of the Russian soldiers to the commanders. Russian soldiers are creating great unrest in the army by disobeying the orders of the Russian officers. The unsuccessful result of the Russian army in Ukraine gave Putin a headache the most. As a result of every blow he receives in Ukraine, Putin becomes the target of heavy criticism. After the Russian people died in the attacks of the Ukrainian army, the reserve soldiers who joined the Russian army with Putin's declaration of mobilization, the protest against the uprising and Putin gained momentum. The Russian people complained that the mobilized soldiers lost their lives as a result of insufficient training against the Ukrainian army. The Kremlin elite's grudge and anger towards Putin increased exponentially after each loss of territory in Ukraine. Putin has no branch left to hold onto in Russia. The Russian leader's chair is shaking. Russian leader Putin is also being held problematic by the events in the Russian barracks in Ukraine. The fact that the mobilized Russian soldiers did not give what they wanted in Ukraine and remained passive against the Ukrainian attacks caused great disappointment. In addition, many Russian reserve soldiers lost their lives in the face of the Ukrainian army. Confusion prevails on the fronts of Russian soldiers in Ukraine. The Ukrainian military said there were tension between Russian soldiers and troops of the Chechen Republic fighting in Vladimir Putin's occupation. Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff said that 3 soldiers were wounded in the clash between soldiers from the Russian occupation Donetsk region and soldiers from the Muslim Majority Republic in the city of Makivka, Donetsk province. Chechen troops fighting on the Moscow side in Ukraine are known as Kadyrovtsi or Kadyrovites after their leaders Ramazan Kadyrov, the pro-Kremlin director of Chechnya. Despite being a staunch supporter of Vladimir Putin, Kadyrov has recently emerged as a vocal critic of Russia's war effort. Kadyrov sent troops to Ukraine at the beginning of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Kadyrov last month criticized General Alexander Lapin, the commander of Russia's largest military district, following Russian military failures. Human rights activists say many Chechen soldiers were recruited against their will after their families were threatened with extortion or physical violence. Before the war, human rights groups accused Kadyrov's forces of extrajudicial killings, kidnappings, and torture of Kadyrov's opponents. Although Kadyrov has repeatedly denied the accusation against him, the allegation against Kadyrov keep coming back and forth. Kadyrov's dictatorial attitude has overwhelmed everyone in his country. No one in Chechnya can freely express their opinions. Chechen soldiers stationed in Russia say that they are in Ukraine with the threats of Kadyrov. Kadyrov's soldiers in Ukraine stated that the war hurt them the most. Kadyrov continues his high-decibel outburst about the war in Ukraine. Putin's ally Kadyrov says Ukrainian cities should be wiped from the world. Ramazan Kadyrov, the leader of Russia's Chechen Republic, has once again criticized the way the army is handling the war and has called for Ukrainian cities to be wiped off the face of the earth. Kadyrov also described Putin's extensive invasion of Ukraine as war. We were saying that we were conducting a special military operation on Ukrainian soil, but the war is already going on in our territory. And my opinion is, if you are wondering, I am very unhappy about it, Kadyrov said. Last month, Russia declared the annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine illegal: Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk and Zaporizhia. None of the regions are fully under control of the Russian forces and Ukrainian victory is expected in Kherson. Ukrainian forces continue to mask steady advances as part of their counterattack. Kadyrov said Putin should not worry about the reaction of the West when making the decision to take cities off the ground. Last month, Kadyrov publicly mocked Putin's army during a series of successful counterattacks by Kiev in southern and northeastern Ukraine. He criticized the Russian Ministry of Defense after Ukrainian forces recaptured Izium, Kupiansk, and Balakleya in the Kharkiv region that Putin had captured during the war. Kadyrov also criticized the leadership of the Ministry of Defense, saying that the Russian army captured several cities and villages. Andrei Kilisach, chairman of the Constitutional Legislational Committee of the Federation Council of Russia, responded to Kadyrov's last words. "Kadyrov speaks like a true warrior. I respect that," said Andrei Kilisach, chairman of the Constitutional Legislation Committee of the Russian Federation Council, and described the conflicts as war. Describing the conflict that started in Russia on February 24 as a war is important considering it was a special military operation as it deviated from the Kremlin line. Russian citizens convicted for calling Putin's attack on Ukraine war or invasion under laws passed in March to break opposition. Ukraine gave information about the developments in the south of the country. The update by the Ukrainian armed forces also explained how stabilization measures were implemented in the free settlements of the Kherson region after the withdrawal of Russian troops from the western bank of Dnipro River, near the regional capital of the same name. It was stated that Russia fired 4 rockets, carried out 23 airstrikes, and carried out 70 bombings in a series of attacks that hit 25 settlements, including Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. Meanwhile, people took to the streets in the city of Kherson to celebrate the decision to withdraw Russian troops from Kherson, which the White House described as an extraordinary victory. Thousands of people took to the streets to celebrate. Ukrainian journalist Olga Tokaryuk said on social media, adding, "They hid the Ukrainian flags for 8 months despite the risk of being executed by the Russians because for this, but they never gave up their spirit." Another Ukrainian journalist, Irina Matvisin, shared a video of celebration, adding the message, "Freedom is worth all the effort." We are also grateful to the United States and the American people for all their support, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said after meeting with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. US support cannot be ignored in the Ukrainian army's retake of the territories occupied by Russian troops in Ukraine. US, Ukraine's ally, provided a number of weapons and military equipment to Ukraine during the occupation of the Russian army. The weapons aid packages of the USA include many cutting-edge and modern weapons. By using these weapons, the Ukrainian army had a great advantage in retaking the occupied areas by the Russian army. The success of the Ukrainian army against the Russian soldiers caused a rift between Putin and everyone. Even Russia's allies have now revolted after Putin's wrong decisions in Ukraine. Russian allies have supported all the decisions taken by the Russian leader in Ukraine since February. However, the unsuccessful result of the Russian army in Ukraine caused it to raise its voice among the Russian allies. The victories of the heroic soldiers of Ukraine managed to set even Russia and its allies against each other. Thank you for watching us.